A history of the concept of the person from Greek antiquity to early modern times. Introduction. This course is designed to investigate the concept of the person as it occurred in the writings of ancient Romans, as it was hinted at by the ancient Greeks, as it later developed throughout the medieval times in both Latin West and Greek East, and finally how it was speculated upon in modern times, in particular in Polish and international Trinitarian debates. We will investigate primarily the theological and philosophical contexts of this debate, but also the regular everyday discourses. Firstly, we have to, however, ask what is the idea of a person as the European culture grasps it. By a person, most European languages mean someone as opposed to something. People, for example, are considered to be persons, whereas things, such as chairs and tables, are not considered to be persons. The grammatical structures of all modern European languages reflect this idea in their discerning between a who and a what, between a kto and a co in Polish, between wer and was in German, between who and what in English. In ancient Greek, tis was different from ti. In Latin, quis was different from quid, and in Proto-Indo-European, quis was different from quos. The European idea of a person refers precisely to those who are a someone, and not to that which is a something. Now, knowing in general how the idea of a person is understood in the European culture, we might ask, secondly, when was the concept corresponding to that idea first coined? That is, in other words, in which particular historical time and in which cultural context there appear one word referential to all beings that are understood as a someone and not as a something. In this lecture, we will investigate how the ancient Greeks used the terms prosopon and hypostasis and ask whether they express the idea of a person as described above. We will move on to the ancient Romans and their use of the Latin word persona. In doing so, we will come across the Trinitarian debate in which the idea of a person was first brought to the fore of philosophical and theological reflection. The methodology. In our study, we will follow a specifically selected methodology. It will be firstly the hermeneutic method of the reading of texts in their original, linguistic, conceptual, cultural contexts. Secondly, it will be the methodology of the intellectual history writing, in the form it received from the Cambridge School of Intellectual History, developed by Quentin Skinner and other British scholars in opposition to Arthur Oncken Lovejoy's method called the history of ideas. Our approach originates from a vibrant methodological discussion held in Krakow at the History of Ideas Research Center of the Jagiellonian University. Let us begin. The ancient Greek culture. The ancient Greek distinguishes between a who and a what in his grammar, since ti is different from tis. Yet there was no one Greek noun that would name all beings that were perceived by the Greeks as someone rather than something. For example, human beings, gods, and all mythological creatures such as sirens, centaurs, cyclops, etc. Let us first consider the Greek terms prosopon and hypostasis that were later disputed in the context of both Trinitarian and Christological debates as good candidates to name the idea of a person. Prosopon denotes a face, visage, or countenance already since the Homeric epics, and this meaning remained the most frequent and popular one, overshadowing other, later uses of this term. The meaning of face appears first in Iliad, Book 18, verses 22 to 25, in reference to Achilles' face. So spake he, and a black cloud of grief enwrapped Achilles, and with both his hands he took the dark dust, and threaded over his head, prosopon, and defiled his fair face, and on his fragment tunic the black ashes fell. This is the oldest known usage of the word prosopon. The later uses of prosopon include the meaning of the front of something, for example in Peloponnesian War, Book 1, Chapter 106, where the author, Thucydides, talks of prosopon in the meaning of the front of an inanimate object. The Athenians, perceiving their situation, closed the entrance in front, kataprosopon, with heavy armed troops, and, placing their light troops in a circle around, stood all who had entered the enclosure. The meaning of a face is the most frequent in classical Greek and appears, for example, at the beginning of Plato's Theaetetus, in which Socrates wonders with Theodorus if his face, prosopon, is similar to that of Theaetetus. Later, prosopon developed a reference to a character in tragedy or comedy and a theatrical mask. All of those, however, appeared next to the most popular and most frequently used meaning of a face. The meaning of a face also appears in Septuagint, in particular in the famous expression to see face to face, prosopon pros prosopon, that appears in the book Genesis 32:30, or in the book of Judges 6:22. In the book of Judges, after his struggle, Gideon says, "Alas, O Lord God, for now I have seen the angel of the Lord, face to face, prosopon pros prosopon." St. Paul famously used this expression in the 13th chapter of his first letter to the Corinthians, which reads, "For now we see only reflection, as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I only know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known." The letter of St. Paul to the Romans contains, furthermore, a significant claim. Ugar estin prosopolempia para tot theo. There is no favoritism of persons in God that employs the noun prosopolempia, whose root stems from the noun prosopon. The phrase is further repeated in the similar form in a quotation of St. Peter in Acts 10:34, in the Epistle to the Ephesians, in the letter of St. James, and in the letter of St. Jude, in which the favoritism of persons is strongly upbraided. Here we notice that with time, the meaning of prosopon that denoted face, visage, or countenance, since at least Homeric's epics, that is, 8th century before Christ, later also a character in a comedy or tragedy, since at least 5th century before Christ, and a face of something, as we saw in the 5th century in Peloponnesian War by Thucydides, has been broadened. In the 1st century after Christ, the uses of this word in the writings of St. Paul and others refer to the meaning of a person as it occurs contemporarily in the European modern languages. Therefore, contrary to a popular belief, the Greek term prosopon does not have the exactly same semantics as the Latin persona, which refers primarily to a theatrical mask. In Greek, prosopon means primarily a face, and it was the Greek prosopeion that would mean a mask. It is this term, prosopeion, that its first use we find in the 4th century in Theophrastus's Characters. There was another Greek word that was later disputed in the context of theological and philosophical Trinitarian and Christological debates as a good candidate to name the idea of a person. It was a Greek hypostasis. Hypostasis was used in common spoken language in classical Greek to name the fact of being under or a foundation. We find the meaning of standing under, for example, in Hippocrates' De Articulis, or in Aristotle's Perikosmou. We also find the meaning of the foundation in Diodorus Siculus' writings. Later, the term hypostasis was also used in the meaning of reassurance or confidence. The word appears, for example, in the 1st century in the letter to the Hebrews and in the 2nd letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians in the meaning of reassurance or confidence. The 2nd letter to the Corinthians employed the term hypostase twice, 9:4 and 11:17, in the sense of confidence, and the letter to the Hebrews used the form hypostaseos twice, Hebrews 1:3 and 3:14, and hypostasis once, Hebrews 1:11, in the sense of reassurance and confidence. Finally, in Hebrews 1:3, we read, "The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of His being, sustaining all things by His powerful word. After He had provided purification for sins, He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven." Here we find the meaning of hypostasis as nature or substance of God. Hypostasis was furthermore of some significance in the philosophical writings of late antiquity, where it builds upon the aforementioned meaning, designing an individual substance which is a substrate of accidental properties. In the 3rd century, the term was famously employed by Plotinus and later became popular among the Neoplatonists, who used it to name various realizations of one deity. In the 2nd century, Tatian the Syrian used this term, presumably for the first time in a Trinitarian treatise, in reference to God. Soon after, Origen did so as well, And later also the Cappadocian Fathers in the 4th century, Basil of Caesarea, Gregory of Nazianzus, and Gregory of Nyssa, who proposed famous Trinitarian formulation using this rare notion, hypostasis, thus bestowing it with the meaning of that which is three within one essence of God. In ancient Greece, however, hypostasis meant foundation, a substance, being under, a reassurance, and not what we today understand by a person, that is, a someone. The meaning of someone, which expresses the contemporary idea of a person, first appeared in ancient Rome in the Latin word persona. The Latin term persona was commonly used in reference to a theatrical mask or to a character in a tragedy or comedy. Furthermore, in Cicero's writings, we find the use of the term persona in reference to a grammatical person such as ego, tu, nos, vos, etc. In his De Officiis, moreover, Cicero summarizes the four following meanings of the term persona. Persona could be referred firstly to all men who are in possession of reason and therefore are capable of virtue and propriety. Secondly, it can refer to men as individual. Thirdly, also to a social role or a function, and fourthly, it can also relate to a status referential to the belonging to a social class. Intellegendum etiam est duabus quasi nos a natura indutos esse personis, quarum una communis est ex eo quod omnes participes sumus rationis restantiaque eius qua antecellimus bestis, aqua omne honestum decorumque trahitur, et ex qua ratio inveniendi officii exquiritur, altera autemque proprie singulis est tribute. Ut enim in corporibus magne dissimilitudines sunt, alios videmus velocitate ad cursum, alios viribus ad luctandem valere, itemque informis allis dignitatem inesse, allis venustatem. Sic in animis existunt maiores etiam varietates. We must realize that we are invested by nature with two characters, as it were. One of these is universal, arising from the fact that of our being all alike endowed with reason and with that superiority with which lifts us above the brutes. From this, all morality and propriety are derived, and upon it depends the rational method of ascerning our duty. The other character is the one that is assigned to individuals in particular. In the matter of physical endowment, there are great differences. Some, we see, excel in speed for the race, others in the strength for wrestling. So in point of personal appearance, some have stateliness, others comeliness. Diversities of character are greater still. Following this quotation, Cicero adds that a persona might also refer to a social role or function and also to a status that means belonging to a social class. Thus, Cicero operates with a fourfold understanding of a person. The first one refers to all men who are endowed with reason, the second one refers to men as individual, the third to a social role or function, and the fourth to a status referential to the belonging to a social class. Apart from the uses that we find in the Seneca's and Cicero's writings, we might also look up how the word persona appears in Roman law, large part of which was dedicated to that which pertains to persons, quid ad personas pertinet. For example, large part of Book 1 of Gaius's Institutiones, written around 170 AD, is dedicated to that which pertains to persons, quod ad personas pertinet. And so is the much later, since it is written in around 535 AD, Book 1 of Justinian's Institutes. Some also link the definition of a person as sui juris et alteri incommunicabilis to the Roman law, but there is little evidence for this in the existent manuscripts. Gaius's Institutiones do not use this phrase, nor does Justinian Codex, Digesta or Institutes. The Roman law does define a person as a human being who is in a possession of civil standing. Persona est homo statu civili preditus. Such an understanding of a person as a legal status refers primarily to grown-up, mature men who were free and were not slaves. This legal context is interesting for us insofar as it was a legally educated convert, Tertullian, who wrote the first Trinitarian treatise in which he stated that within God there is one substance and three persons, una substantia, tres personae. In Adversus Praxean, written in between 204 and 205, thus at the beginning of the 3rd century, Tertullian offered the aforementioned understanding of a person without speculating much on its precise meaning, however. It is this treatise, however, that comprises a watershed in the heretofore described alterations of the diachronic development of an understanding of a person, for it is this treatise in which the Latin persona is referred to the three realities in one substance of God. In his Ecclesiastica Historia, the history of church, Eusebius of Caesarea calls Tertullian a man well versed in the laws of the Romans. Thus is it possible that he referred to the term he knew and understood from the Roman law, the term which primarily referred to human beings, those which were in possession of legal standing. Thus, from this moment in time, the Latin persona refers to the categories of beings such as divine persons, human beings, and by means of analogy also to angelic beings such as angels or demons. It is clear, therefore, that from this moment in time, the beginning of the 3rd century, the category of the person, Latin persona, refers to all beings which are understood to be a someone rather than a something. The first meaning of Latin persona, a mask or a theatrical role, seems to have played little influence on the coining of the theological meaning of the term persona. It seems that what was of more influence was the legal context Tertullian was acquainted with. Most philosophers and theologians involved later on in the Trinitarian debates would, however, refer the term person rather to its first meaning in Latin, that is that of a mask or a role in a comedy or tragedy. Little do the later Latin commentators know about the fact that Greek prosopon does not have the exact same semantics as the Latin persona, and that it primarily means a countenance, and only from this meaning there developed a meaning of a mask in the context of a theatrical role. It seems that later in history this meaning have somehow masked the original meaning of the Greek prosopon, as we find it in Homeric epics, that is, the meaning of the face or countenance.